everybody, and welcome to this special event tonight with Banyen Books. Our honored guest this evening is Barbara Hand Clow. Now, we would like to acknowledge that although we have people joining us from all over the world, the physical location of Banyen Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Banyen Books is in its 50th anniversary year this year. That's 50 years as Canada's spiritual and healing resource, an independent and local bookstore from day one. Please, everybody, support your local independent bookstores. Every purchase you make from Banyen helps to support programs like this one tonight. You can come and browse in store. We're open 7 days a week. Or you can visit us on our online store at banyen.com. That's BANYEN.com. Today, Barbara Hand Clow will speak on her new initiatic novel, Revelations from the Source. Barbara Hand Clow is an internationally acclaimed ceremonial teacher, author, and Mayan calendar researcher. Her numerous books include The Pleiadian Agenda, Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, Awakening the Planetary Mind, and the Mayan Code. She is taught at sacred sites throughout the world, and together with Jerry Clow, maintains the website handclow2012.com, where you can learn more about her books and her work. Barbara Hand Clow's new novel, Revelations from the Source, offers readers a 9-dimensional initiation encoded in visionary fiction that is a celebration for the arrival of the Aquarian Age. It offers an in-depth experience of alchemical transmutation to cleanse old parts of the psyche and clear space for the shift to 5D through 9D consciousness. Based on ancient teachings and astrological wisdom, Revelations from the Source continues the story from her earlier novels, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal and Revelations of the Aquarian Age. Banyen hosted the launch of both of those previous books in 2015 and 2018, respectively. So we're thrilled to welcome her for this third in the series. Banyen Books community, please join me in a warm welcome for Barbara Hand Clow. Barbara, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ross. And thank you for everybody who's tuning in tonight. So what I need to start with is to get a sense of why I switched to fiction. Now, Ruby Crystal and Revelations from the Aquarian Age are both works of fiction, as is Revelations from the Source. But before that, for 35 years or something like that, I was writing nonfiction books, and I was exploring all kinds of teachings that had been given to me as a child from my Cherokee grandfather and from my early education. And I was exploring various data banks in order to understand different issues. And some of you watching this tonight are familiar with some of those works. But what happened for me was that when I got up to about 2010, 2011, I reached the point where I realized that I had really finished my own work. I had done some astrological investigation. I had done some investigation into past life regression under hypnosis and into deep therapy. And I'd explored the Mayan calendar. And I'd done a deep exploration of the last 20,000 years of human consciousness in a book called Catastrophobia, which has been retitled Awakening the Planetary Mind. So for those of you who want to get into that deep timeline, that's actually coming from Awakening the Planetary Mind. And so when I got up to 2010, 2011, since I was a Mayan calendar researcher, I was attempting to assess my own work. It's kind of a natural thing. We were coming to a real turning point in 2011, 2012. And so I assessed all of my own work and decided, as I reviewed everything, that the most original of my work is The Pleiadian Agenda and Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. All of my books, other books, one way or another, are an investigation of specific data banks that many other people have also explored. But with Pleiadian Agenda, a completely new and original teaching came in that I still think of as my most original work. And then I investigated the Pleiadian Agenda scientifically by writing Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. And Alchemy of Nine Dimensions came out in 2004. Pleiadian Agenda came out in 1995. So we're going back at this point, like, 30 years. Amazing. And so Alchemy of Nine Dimensions went through a major revision in 2011. And for those of you who are interested in studying that book, I really would advise you to get the more recent edition, because Alchemy of Nine Dimensions is a scientific investigation of nine dimensions of consciousness. And I just didn't have the fourth dimension together when I wrote the book in 2004. And the fourth dimension is the realm of consciousnesses that are not physical that affect us in our realm. It's the realm of the collective mind. It's the realm of like the collective consciousness that connects all of us. And I just didn't have it quite right. So it's very, very important to have that dimension be correct. So be careful about getting the most recent edition. Fortunately, most of the 2004 copies are gone. And so what happened for me was I assessed everything and I realized that the most important thing that I could do for the rest of my life, and at that point I was 70, and now I'm approaching 80, and I realized the most important thing that I could do for the rest of my life is to help people experience multidimensional consciousness. I needed to help people like you find out what it's like to feel the second dimension, the realm of microbes and viruses, which is such a vital dimension in our current moment, or the fifth dimension, which is the opening of the heart and the opening of heart consciousness. And I realized I need to find a way to help people experience that. Well, first of all, Jerry and I knew that back in 1995. And so from 1995 until 2010, we taught classes that were called Pleiadian Agenda Activations. And some of you may have attended those. And in those classes, over a period of 2.5 days, people actually did move into different dimensions and into multidimensional consciousness. But I realized, like, I need to find a way to help lots and lots of people experience these realities. And I realized that the only way I could do that was to write fiction. Well, it just so happens that fiction is what I always really wanted to write. Secretly, while I was working on various academic books and kind of left brain investigations, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to write fiction because I wanted to tell stories. And so the only thing that I had to go on at that point back in 2010, if I was going to write fiction, was another book that that came out, started coming out in 1986. It came out through a series of volumes. And it's a work that ended up being called the Mind Chronicles Trilogy. And that book was published in one edition in 2008. It's an absolutely fascinating work of art as far as I'm concerned. In fact, it's one of the things that I'm very, very proud of, because it's based on my investigation of 100 past lives under regression. I did 100 sessions under hypnosis, and it's not so much that it's 100 past lives, because I kept revisiting different lifetimes and weaving them together. And then sometimes what I found is I would find myself tuning into an individual in the past initiatic individual, whatever, that wasn't really my lifetime, but I discovered by doing this level of work that you actually can tune into people in the past. And so the Mind Chronicles trilogy is a trilogy, and the trilogy format is a pretty tricky deal, because if you're going to write a trilogy, you need to introduce the material and the characters in the first book. And then once you introduce them, and once the reader gets a chance to find out what they're like as people and what kind of things they're doing in their lifetimes, including sex and creativity and the full range of human behavior, then when you get into the middle book in the trilogy, you start going into deeper levels of the meaning of those characters that you created in their lifetimes. And in the middle book in a trilogy, you'll see a lot of different timelines and going back and forth in time, where you start to find out more about how those characters exist in their lifetime. And then the most difficult book in a trilogy is the third one. And in this case, that's Revelations from the Source, which just came out. It's just hitting the book shelves now. And the difficult thing in a trilogy is that in the third book, ideally what happens is you create an apotheosis with your characters. You bring forth something through your characters that is a unique contribution to the planet and to consciousness. And it's a very difficult thing to do, and a lot of writers, frankly, have not really succeeded at it. And in the Mind Chronicles trilogy, the third book is called Signet of Atlantis. And in the third book in the Mind Chronicles trilogy, I hoped to really show how my characters and how the lifetimes that I was exploring actually were involved with the creation of Atlantis and even the fall of Atlantis. And frankly, I didn't succeed. The Mind Chronicles trilogy is a wonderful work of art, but I just didn't make it. And to tell you the truth, that's real common. So I decided this time I'm going to write a trilogy, and I'm going to have great characters, and I'm going to take those characters through all kinds of deep levels of their lives. And then finally, when I come to the third book in this trilogy, I'm going to take these characters to really, really high levels of consciousness. And I can honestly say that I made it this time. And this is one of the reasons that I'm so excited about Source. Because Source, of course, came through. Source covers a timeline from 2018 to 2021. And in a minute, I'm going to go back to the earlier two books so you can get a better sense of the timeline of the whole trilogy. But I don't have to tell you, as you join me today in thinking about these things, I don't have to tell you that the last 3 years, 2018, 2019 through 2021, have been incredibly difficult. And so it's exciting to me that these wonderful characters that I created actually do go to a very high level of consciousness attainment in revelation from the source. So let's for a moment, let's just go back to Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, which is the first book. And that Revelations of the Ruby Crystal covers 2011 through 2015. And then Revelations from the Aquarian Age covers 2015 through 2018. And then Revelations from the Source covers 2018 through 2021. Well, you have to ask yourself, what was I doing? And this is where I'm going to get really honest with you from a twofold point of view. Back in 2010, 2011, as we were coming to the end of the Mayan calendar, and as I was coming to that point of really assessing my life's work, I decided that I needed to really examine what was going to happen for the next 10 or 15 years. In other words, I decided back in 2010, 2011, based on what's going on right now, I need to take a careful look at the next 10 or 15 years. And of course, how do I do that? Well, I'm an astrologer, and my astrological work is primarily historical analysis and consciousness analysis. And so I did about 10 to 12 years of astrological investigation back in 2010. And when I did that, I could see that our world was going to crack in 2020. And the reason for this is a group of transits in Capricorn, especially Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus. And this was a group of transits that had not occurred, as far as I can tell, for the last 735 years. In other words, I could see that in 2020, that we were coming up to a cycle that was going to take the reality that we have been developing for the last 700 years, and it was going to crack. And then what was going to happen is a new reality and a new form of life was going to, excuse me, emerge from that. So then it's not only about 700 years. The other big deal for me is the issue of the precession of the equinoxes. I've done a great deal of research into the changes of the ages, because what happens on our planet is every 2,160 years, approximately, we go out of one age and we go into a new age. And so the last time this happened was around 2100 BC, when we went into the age of Aries. And then around 0 AD, we came into the age of Pisces. And now you and I are all lucky enough to be alive on this planet at this moment as we leave the age of Pisces and move into the age of Aquarius. And up until 2,000 years ago, during the time of the beginning of Christianity, up until 2,000 years ago, cultural teachers and spiritual teachers helped people understand all the issues of the age that they were finishing. In other words, when we came to the change of an age, there was always a great rise in spiritual direction from spiritual teachers who would help people understand what they were letting go of with the age that was leaving, and would help them understand the age that they were going into. So the other issue in the Revelations trilogy is a very deep teaching about the end of the age of Pisces and the beginning of the age of Aquarius, which is what's happening at this moment in time. It's what's happening right now. So I realized I need to find a way to create a work of fiction that will tell the story through the characters of a bunch of really great people. And it will tell the story through the characters of how they're dealing with ending the previous age, the age of Pisces, and how they're doing as they're entering into the age of Aquarius. Okay, so fine, there I was. A lot of thinking going on in 2010. I'm sure there was for you too. And then in May of 2011, I decided that was right in the middle of the end of the Mayan calendar, based on Carl Kalaman's research, which I respect so much. So I went to my writing room, and where I keep all of my equipment and crystals and all these good things. And I went to my writing room and I said, okay, I want to write a work of fiction. And I asked the muse, I asked my guides, I asked the Pleiadian, guide me, give me a sense of how to do this, because I'd done so much deep thinking about it. And the Pleiadians appeared at that point, and this was an energetic appearance. Sometimes they appear in reality, but this was more energetic appearance. And they said, get out a yellow tablet and a pencil and write it all down. So, okay, I'm used to this kind of stuff. My life, I live completely by guidance, and I've had some of the most amazing experiences in this lifetime where I followed guidance that seemed to be completely nuts. And then a year or two later, I realized, like, oh my God, now I see what a work of genius that was. So whenever they're willing to give me information, I always take it and I follow it. And I think it's actually very wise advice for living on the planet Earth. Okay, so there it was. And Pleiadians gave me the names, ages, educational background, career choices, personal lifestyle, all of the background, complete description of about 10 or 11 or 12 characters. And these characters span a couple of three generations. I have characters who are around, who like boomer people, like in their 60s and 70s. And then I've got people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And then we even have a few children coming through the younger characters in the book. So we have grandchildren and we have parents and we have grandparents, which I think is a wonderful way to, I love novels that do that. So I guess that's why the Pleiadians gave me that opportunity, because what I found is once I started writing the novels, I found that the interactions between the generations and between the families, and the families eventually in the novels, in the trilogy, get connected with each other. Okay, so all of the characters for the first book came in except one, and I'll tell you about that character in a minute. So what I did next was I went, okay, I'm going back to my work schedule. And when I'm writing and working, and this is resulted in the creation of 20 books. When I'm writing, I write from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., 6 days a week, and I don't vary my schedule hardly ever. So I sat down with my list of care. Oh, I missed a piece here. Let's bring Jerry into this because Jerry's such a great part of this. Jerry and I have been married now for 49 years, and we're just as happy at this moment as we were in the beginning. We had an absolutely wonderful experience together. We ran Bear and Company in the early days, and Jerry's a cranial sacral therapist at this point. We taught together. He's also a writer and he's working on a book, and Jerry and I just have had a wonderful life. So on the morning of May 2011, when this list of characters came in, I went out of my writing room and went into the kitchen and told Jerry what happened and described what happened. And then he did something really bizarre. Until this moment in time, when I had come up with an idea for a book, basically Jerry would say, Chiron? What's Chiron? Or what about Kundalini energy? You're going to write about Kundalini energy? Jerry was always like, basically figured we could have a hell of a lot more fun if I didn't write those books. This time, Jerry said, you've got to do this. You've got to write these books and you've got to get these people to tell their story. And this was really, really meaningful for me. It would be for anybody who'd been married to somebody for a long time. Yeah, that kind of breakthrough. But it was really meaningful for me in the long run because writing this trilogy was really hard. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I also think the greatest thing I've ever done. And I really think if Jerry hadn't responded that way, maybe it never would have happened. I can't tell, but I kind of wonder. Okay, so I started it out. So with Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, I could tell by the description of the characters. One wonderful character, Sarah Appel, is a early church researcher. Her husband, Simon Appel, is a New York Times reporter and an investigator, also in Jerusalem, mainly in Rome, another great character is a painter named Armando Leone. And this trilogy, by the way, takes place in Italy, primarily in Rome and Tuscany, and also in the United States. So I could tell by the quality of the characters that we were going to go deep into issues regarding the Catholic Church and regarding the Vatican. So the background exploration in Ruby Crystal is a deep exploration of the issues with priestly sexual abuse. And the issues with priestly sexual abuse go all the way through all three books. And many of the characters have different issues with this. And this has turned out to be a primary issue of our time. So it's a really primary background issue. So basically, what I did is I went to work and I just let the characters interact with each other. And in Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, the plot unfolded as I was writing. Then, when it was time to do Aquarian Age, Ruby Crystal was done, it came out. Then, when it was time to do Aquarian Age, what I had to do was I had to work with the timeline in these characters' lives from 2015 to 2018. And in order to work with that timeline in Italy as well as in the United States, I had to create a plot. So I started plotting pretty seriously with Aquarian Age, and the plot is very interesting. And with Aquarian Age, what we see is we see the characters dealing with the end of the Age of Pisces and the end of their experiences during the Age of Pisces. And we see some of the issues of the Age of Pisces just starting to collapse, basically. And then we start to see the first intimations of the Age of Aquarius coming in. So in the Aquarian Age, Revelations of the Aquarian Age, you start seeing the basic paradigms of the Aquarian Age that all of us are going to be living out in this lifetime, and people are going to be living out for 2,100 years. So then Aquarian Age came in, and then it was time to bring in Source. And with Source, I found immediately there was an extremely complicated plot. And it was so complicated that even I had a lot of trouble figuring it out. Because it was such an interweaving of all of the patterns in the lives of all of the characters in the first two books. But what was really happening, and this is interesting, it's so interesting to be a creative artist, because often you create something and struggle with it and suffer with it, and you get it all done, and you still don't even know why you did it. And this was my experience with Revelations from the Source. All I could do was create it artistically and plot it well, but I couldn't really get any perspective on Revelations from the Source until I was actually able to read it once it was finished. And what happened for me was really amazing. What happened for me was I realized this is a multi-dimensional novel. What's happening in this novel is all of the characters individually are working with different levels of consciousness. And then what's happening is the interaction between them from the point of view of consciousness is what's taking this to a multi-dimensional level. And I actually think that's what happens in our own lifetimes. I think what takes us to multidimensional levels is our interactions with other people, and particularly our interactions from a shamanic ceremonial point of view. Because what happens in Source concludes with a really incredible 9-dimensional ceremony, which is a reenactment of all of the Pleiadian agenda activations that Jerry and I did Pleiadian agenda activations all over the world at major sacred sites, Egypt, Mexico, Sweden, Europe. We just did as many activations as we could in order to open up this consciousness. But in this novel, the culmination is the activation of 9 dimensions. And so you have to wonder, like, well, how could that happen? How could I create it? Well, the real key to that question, for those of you who, and I think there's probably some people out there who have read Ruby Crystal and Aquarian Age, or at least one of the books. And one of the most intriguing characters in the trilogy is Armando Pierleone. Armando Pierleone is the son of a very aristocratic family, a count in Tuscany. And Armando Pierleone is a really, really talented painter, talented on the level of a great Renaissance artist. And throughout this lifetime, for me, I think it's interesting that I ended up creating a character who's a painter, because throughout this lifetime, I've had very close friends who are really great painters, and they have shared with me how their vision of reality comes through their art. And so Armando is kind of a composite of some of the great painters I've known in this lifetime. But Armando is also really obsessed with the dark side. We find in Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, we find Armando appears as a major abuser of a lot of women. And then in Revelations of the Aquarian Age, he marries happily and he starts to transform and transmute his personal consciousness. So Aquarian Age shows us a character who is going beyond being obsessed with the dark side and going into a phase of higher consciousness. And then in Revelations from the source, we see Armando. Excuse me for this. This is just what the way it is. We see Armando really attaining really, really amazing psychic levels and levels of high consciousness. Well, how does that happen in a novel? Well, we have this wonderful character. His name is Lorenzo Giannini. And Lorenzo Giannini is the greatest Jungian analyst in Rome. And this was my chance to play out my own desire to be a Jungian analyst, because I almost became one, but I diverted into creative writing. And Lorenzo Giannini, all the way through the trilogy, is functioning like a maestro. He's functioning like a conductor of a symphony, because he's doing sessions with most of the characters at various levels. And Lorenzo Giannini is the character who appeared, who didn't appear in the first list. There's a couple of characters who didn't appear on that first list from the Pleiadians. And the way Lorenzo appeared was really, really funny, at least as far as I'm concerned. What happened in Ruby Crystal was, as Armando was abusing women and doing his bad behavior and painting, Armando also was trying to change himself, but was basically not getting anywhere. So around the last 2/3 of Ruby Crystal, maybe chapter 25 or something like that, I reached a dead end. I didn't plot Ruby Crystal, and I reached a dead end and I was stuck. And I sat in my office and I went, now what do I do? And Lorenzo Giannini appeared. And unlike the other characters that I wrote on the yellow tablet, he actually appeared like a magician. And he said, you've got to understand that I have done analysis with Armando for the last 10 years. And you didn't know about that. But now I'm telling you that I've reached this point with Armando where I can't stand him either. And he's got to go to another level. And you got to take him to another level. And so in the rest of Aquarian Age, Armando went to another level. And Lorenzo ended up playing this wonderful role all the way through from that, the last second two books, Aquarian Age and Source. And then also Lorenzo ends up being the partner of a really incredible woman named, let's see, her last name is, it doesn't want to come to you. Let's see, I'm going to look at my thing. Okay, sorry. She's the character that I know probably better than all the other ones, but I thought of her last name first. Her name is Claudia Tagliati. She's a Roman woman, fashion designer, actually. And Claudia pairs up with Lorenzo, and Claudia is a brilliant astrologer. So we find in Source, as we come into Source, into the third novel, we start to see the astrological background of the period from 2010 to 2021 coming in. And so what happens in Source is we get the astrological comprehension of the huge change in consciousness that has been occurring in our reality. And so what happened as everything evolved, another character showed up, Alessandro De Medici, a Florentine Italian, basically alchemist and basically a magician. Basically, Alessandro he's really one of the most remarkable characters in the book in terms of high consciousness, and he ends up orchestrating the ceremony at the end of the book. And so what I've given you a sense of, I'm going to watch, I want to make sure I don't miss anything before we switch over to questions. Okay. I wanted to kind of complete, I've kind of given you a little bit of a sense of the trilogy itself. But the question would be, what does that really have to do with my lifetime work? And that's where the trilogy really is the highest expression of my work in Pleiadian agenda and alchemy of 9 dimensions. And so far, people who are reading it are telling me that they are experiencing multidimensional consciousness just by reading these books. Now, this is very, very important because the reason that I love fiction is that no matter how many left brain analytical books I read where I discover amazing things, when I read fiction and when I get to know a character, what happens is what the character experiences becomes indelible in my consciousness. Like just experiencing a woman on the level of Claudia Tagliati, her astrological genius and her understanding of multidimensional consciousness, because Claudia has really mastered the multidimensional model that I taught in Pleiadian Agenda and in Alchemy of 9 Dimensions. And so what happens is these characters become your friends. These turn into people that you experience things with and you don't forget. And what happens is then you experience levels of awareness that you might not attain otherwise. In the ancient indigenous tradition, the reason storytelling is so important is that we know that when people and children especially absorb archetypes of consciousness and archetypal ideas, we know that when they experience those things in stories that have a beginning and an end and tell of love and tell of compassion and tell us of the love of life, what happens is it's such a full experience that we embody levels of awareness that are really hard to get otherwise. You don't get it just reading about it.
There's a question from Sharon who says, I'd be curious to know whether this latest book offers tips and ways for us all to move through this time, and how and when we will come to the new world?
That's a great question, and it absolutely does. It's not what I intended. I knew that our world was going to fall apart, and my original intention was, I figured, since the world's going to crack, and since everything is going to fall apart, I hope somebody shows how it happened. So through the trilogy, we start to see why things are cracking and falling apart. But then as we get into the latter part of Source, what's happening is the characters themselves are going to the next level of consciousness that I think we're all attaining right now. As difficult as this has been, and the last 2 years have been incredibly hard, I also am finding that people are really going to deep levels of awareness and deep levels of attunement and deep levels of clearance, and also confronting very, very hard questions about freedom and fate and who's controlling us. And I'm not going to say too much about the issues that have to do with vaccinations and COVID and all that, because the book has an afterword, and the afterword gives my absolute clear point of view on these issues. So yeah, this book definitely gives us a lot of guidance regarding what's happening to us right now.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of ties into a question from Narayan, and just I realize you're saying, you know, a lot of this is handled in the book. So I'll read you his question if there's anything that you can touch on right now. He asks, what are the cosmic or astrological forces shaping such events as the election of Trump, the pandemic, and climate change?
That's obviously a huge, you know, right? That's an hour lecture. But
Yeah.
what I can say that I think is helpful is the book works with the transits all the way through 2020, because there's major ones, Saturn conjunct Pluto in January 2020, and then Saturn conjunct Jupiter basically at Christmas 2020. It's a whole major transit phase, which is delineated very carefully. Then what's not in the book, because we're going beyond my timeline, is all the way through 2021. We've had a series of squares between Saturn and Uranus. Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. The first one was like February this year. Second one was like June. And then the last one is Christmas Eve Day, December 24th. Those three transits have taken the whole conflict that we're dealing with regarding the Great Reset, artificial intelligence taking over, the issues of public health controlling our personal realities. Those three transits have taken those questions, which are very difficult questions, into the personal realm. So all of us have been feeling a huge stress because all of those huge, large issues are working out within our personal lives. So the good news is the last one is Christmas Eve Day, December 24th. And that pressure for us to have to live out these huge archetypal dramas that are being created by billionaires and great forces and all that, it's going to not funnel through us so much at the personal level. And I know for me, I hope so. The personal level has been a great struggle, you know. So we are getting someplace, because you don't get any place unless you do it that way. But that doesn't mean that you need to do it for one whole year, as far as I'm concerned. It's the way it is.
Thank you. There's a question from Diane who's wondering, can you say more about these being initiations? In what way?
Big initiations. Okay.
I think she might be I don't know if she's referring to the books being initiations or.
Yeah, because the third book is extremely initiatic, of all of the characters, particularly Armando. So there's not much I can say about it because it's something that needs to be experienced. And the question would be, do you experience real initiations in this third novel? And yes, you do. And I'm very proud of being able to. It's one thing to go out and do it with a group. It's another thing to describe it in a book, in a way that's going to initiate the person who's reading the book.
Thanks. Roxana is asking, do we have to read the books in order, or could we just jump into this new one, Revelations from the Source?
Okay, this is a choice because every book is a standalone. Each book is a standalone, and when you write a trilogy or when you read a trilogy, each book has to be a standalone. So if you want to really know about the personal, private lives of the characters in depth, you got to read Ruby Crystal. And I'm pretty sure that almost anybody who decides to read Ruby Crystal is going to go right for Aquarian Age. Most people are, because then once you get a sense of who they are, then you want to see what happens to them. So you just can't resist. But if people choose to just read Revelations from the Source, I made sure that that was okay. But you'll have to realize that as you encounter a character like Armando Chiarleone, there will be a reference to things he did in the past, but you're not going to have the whole story of what actually happened in the past. So,
okay, that's a great answer. Thank you.
yeah.
I'm wondering myself, your characters, you communicate, you were introduced to these characters. Do they exist on another plane of consciousness, or are they hit from the past and history and they were on Earth at a different time, or how do they exist?
I think that's just a great question, and I can approach it from a couple of points of view. First of all, the characters all are facets of me. It's always that way as a writer. So there's just Claudia is so much the astrologer is so much like me. It's almost a joke, but she's different from me. She's a different person. Then, secondly, the characters are so real and so much fun that for 10 years I found it really hard to socialize at all. These characters, because they're brilliant, psychic, intuitive, mostly more moral. Armando eventually gets there. These are the kind of people that you might meet 3 people like that in your whole lifetime. And then here's a book with a group of them. And so I did find it hard to even want to socialize while I was working with them. Thirdly, all the way through writing this trilogy, I felt like I was writing a record. I often had to go into an altered state and just let go of my left brain completely, because the more I let go of my own opinions about things, the more things just flowed in really, really clearly. So I strongly suspect that these characters are existing in other realities, possibly in other dimensions. But I don't know that. Great question.
Thank you. Thanks. Wondering from there's a question from Lie who's got a few questions, and we'll see if we can touch on a couple of them. First off, Lie says, congratulations on your latest book. I'm just reading your Kundalini Rising, and I'm completely hooked, and it is thrilling to be here watching you talk.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Lie then asks, what is your recommendation for a book on the Mayan calendar?
For a book on the Mayan calendar, there's obviously a number of them. It depends upon, because the calendar basically, we've come to the end of a time phase, and Carl Kalaman is still continuing along with different levels of vibrations that are continuing. So I guess if I was going to advise people, I certainly would advise reading Carl Kalaman. I would also advise reading The Mayan Code by Jose Arguelles, which is just a a basic paradigm in Mayan calendar research. Also, John Jenkins' book on 2012 is pretty excellent. Once you get into reading in this field, you're not going to have any problem finding books because there's a lot of them. You know, the Mayan Code is very good, which is my understanding of the Mayan calendar, and which is basically based on Carl Kalaman's work.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. The next question from Lie is, what do you recommend to a woman age 38 in order to have a smooth Kundalini rising?
I'm smiling here because I don't know whether she's gotten a copy of, let's see, I have to get the titles right. See, my book on Kundalini and midlife crisis and Kundalini rising was first called Liquid Light of Sex. And then what happens with me is I'm just looking, okay, it's the new title is Astrology and the Awakening of Kundalini. And there literally is no better book. And since you're 38 years old, there's tables at the end of the book that go back or go far enough into the current time so that you can get all of the information on the actual timing of your Kundalini rising. And then the other issue would be, I'm the astrologer who created the hypothesis that all of us have some form of Kundalini rising when we experience Uranus opposition. That's just my personal theory and hypothesis, and quite a few people have accepted that at this point. That most people think of midlife crisis as being Kundalini rising because of awakening. Let's see, get it right. Astrology and the Awakening of Kundalini. If you find an old copy of Liquid Light of Sex, the book hasn't changed at all. It's just a table somewhere updated at the end. But I would say, since you're getting closer and closer to your Uranus opposition at age 38, for you, it's going to happen when you're about 42. I would definitely bone up on this. It's a big deal.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's one last question from Lie, which is, what do you think of Vedic astrology?
I don't use it. And so I know it works. I can tell it works because of things that people tell me. It just is an earlier form of astrology, and it's excellent. It's just that I don't do it myself. There are many different types of astrology. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question from Talia, who's asking, can you explain the symbolism featured on the wonderful cover of the book?
Of source? Okay.
Yes.
So what's going on there is there's a wheel in there, which is the wheel of the great 12 great ages, Aries, Pisces, and so on. And then, of course, this is somebody else's work of art. This is based on a sketch, by the way, by my daughter Liz, and then the publisher adopted it. And obviously, it's showing a goddess rising through the center of the wheel. And the symbolism there certainly has a lot to do with the idea that ultimately everything turns around the woman, everything turns around the feminine, everything turns around the goddess. And all of you men who are tuned in here right now, you're a goddess too, so don't feel left out. The feminine is like the energy that actually causes the cosmos to move, and it causes things to turn and develop, and so that's definitely the meaning of it. And well, I guess we can't ask her if she likes the cover. I like the cover.
She did say that it was she called it the wonderful cover, I believe. Yeah, on the wonderful cover.
I can say this since we have it. Since we have it right in front of us, you can see with Revelations of the Ruby Crystal that there's a lightning bolt striking the top of the Vatican. And when Pope Benedict the 16th stepped down and resigned, left his post as the Pope. A lightning bolt did strike the top of the Vatican. That's a photograph of the lightning bolt that struck the top of the Vatican. And for me, that not only symbolizes, it actualizes the fact that all of the higher dimensions came into the top of the Vatican and then went through the Vatican and down into the earth. And so definitely some kind of major development has been happening in the Vatican during our lifetimes, which a lot of us have been watching from many points of view.
Wow, that's a photograph.
That's a photograph. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question from Nora. We just have a few more minutes. Nora's wondering, she says, I've never heard of the concept of an initiative novel before. Are there other books that you've read that function as genuine initiations?
That's a really, really great question, because I think that a fair number of New Agers and even New Consciousness people in the 19th century, even the 18th century, have tried to write initiatic novels. Nothing really comes to mind right now, but writers have tried to do that. And what I've noticed with people who try to write fiction, who aren't really fiction writers, is that they have a great deal of trouble creating great characters. And so where my trilogy would differ probably from most things in the past is that these are great characters and they actually do achieve initiatic levels. And so first of all, our whole culture kind of, is against the idea that anybody does initiate, anybody does go to another level. And then to actually create fiction that describes it, that is very unusual. And it'll never, this, by the way, Source is, I was an acquisitions editor for 20 years, and I'll speak from my post. Source is a really great novel, and you will never hear about it in the New York Times. You will never hear about it on any major media or anything, because it's way, way, way too out there for those avenues of coverage.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question from Kathy, and she says, "Hi, Barbara. Greetings from British Columbia.
Good.
Your body of work is incredible, and I love listening to your interviews. I'm wondering if you're considering teaching your 2-day Pleiadian workshops in the future. Thank you."
Most of you will have noticed, I'm going to be 79 in a few months. Most of you will have noticed that I cough a lot. I can't teach because of that. It's really sad. I had a very severe exposure to tuberculosis when I was a child, and I've done this whole lifetime. I've done homeopathy. I do all kinds of alternative treatments and all that. But what's happening is I just can't speak a lot. It was a challenge to agree to do this with Banyen, just because it's so difficult for me to talk. So I put it out there to the Pleiadians every day. If you want me to teach Pleiadian agenda activations, clear up my voice and I will. But otherwise I can't. So I'd love to. My website has a complete coverage of how to teach the class, how to teach that particular class. And lots of people have used our format to teach it themselves. And I highly recommend people experiment with it themselves. It's really fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
There's one more question I think we can get to before we close, from Lee, who says, "Thank you so much, Barbara. I wonder if I can reach you. The way how you write is so easy to understand for me and so connecting. I'm also interested in a workshop too." So I guess for people that want to connect with you, can we hear your website again is handclow2012.com. That's right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if people want to reach out and contact through that website, they can?
Well, it's obviously I can't communicate to a lot of people. It's just, it's a simple thing. So what I do is I just do the best I can, answering as many people as I possibly can. And everybody seems to be pretty happy. I just do, but it can, I have a feeling this book is going to be really successful and going to be overwhelmed. And if that happens, remember that my spirit is right in the book, even if you can't talk to me.
That's wonderful. Thanks to everybody in the audience for your wonderful questions and for being here to join us this evening. A big thanks, of course, to Jacob Steele, who's always, he facilitates and curates all of Banyen's events and the Banyen podcast and brings us all of this wonderful programming. So big thanks to Jacob. And of course, Barbara Clow, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. Really excited about your new book and all the work that you've done.
Well, thank you, Ross. Thanks for the support. And thank you, Jacob, too. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's listening.